Welcome back to Ask Lee Wednesday. If this is your first time here, then Ask Lee Wednesday is where you can ask me a question and I will add it to the list and answer it on a Wednesday. Alright, so if you do have any questions, just leave them in the comments below, or if you're listening on the podcast, you can go to, it was anchor.fm, it's now podcast for Spotify or Spotify podcasters or something like that. But you can use the anchor.fm/Lee W. Johnson link to get to it. It'll redirect you. And you can leave a voice note on there for me with your questions. Right, so let's get into today's topic. Welcome to my channel. You are entering the world of magic and mysticism with your host, Lee W. Johnson. Keep the lights on and help improve the channel by becoming a supporter for just $2.99 per month. Hit the join button. So today's question was from TasaRemiLarisSatan. And the question was, I would love to see your perspective on Leviathan for a video. Alright, so I'm going to focus on, it was asked to about my own perspective, so I'm going to focus on that mostly. We'll do a little bit of background, but what I also want to include in this is Varuna, which is a Hindu deity. And I think you'll understand why I'm including that. So, tiny bit of background about Leviathan. Leviathan is often considered to be a sea monster. It is, the name itself originates from the Hebraic. So it is a Hebraic or Jewish entity. Now, there are varying stories, mythologies, and such things. I think one of the most important ones would be that Leviathan is a world serpent and Ouroboros. And if you actually look into the mythology of that aspect, it's quite interesting to compare that with different Ouroboros or Ouroboros stories and myths from different traditions. So we can look at Jormungandr from the Nordic. And Jormungandr is said to be the world serpent and wraps around the world and bites his own tail. And in this case, when he releases his jaws from his own tail, then Ragnarok's going to begin. So if we come back to Leviathan being a sea serpent or an Ouroboros, in this case, Leviathan is considered to wrap around the world as a serpent, as a world serpent, and in this instance separates us from divine. So it kind of separates the divine realm from the material realm. And then at the end of days, Leviathan and Behemoth will be served up to the righteous. Okay, so we're going to, the righteous are going to eat the sea serpent and the earth serpent or earth monster. But anyway, besides that, what is interesting here though is the separation, the wrapping around the world aspect. And just keep that in mind. I'm going to talk about Leviathan first, but I'll get onto Varuna, and you'll probably see why I'm bringing your attention to that. So, Leviathan for me. Who is Leviathan for me? Leviathan really has two aspects for me. One is that sea monster, and in that relation, it is the sea monster, which is a very, very aggressive, but it's a protective aspect. So if you piss any of Leviathan's children off, or if you piss him off, I don't really think he actually gives two shits about whether you piss him off. He'll just, you know, flick his tail and swipe you away. But if you attack his children, then you'll probably find that he will go after you like a father would. You know, you attack someone's children, they're going to attack you. It's just the way it goes. But the other side of it, which is more the side that I experience, is very much a kind of, I always picture Leviathan as the emperor from the tarot card. So he is the older, wiser man, the king that sits on the throne, but he's not ruling by force or by fear. It's a very fatherly type of energy. It's a very warm, guiding and teaching type of energy that he brings across. And I have worked with the Leviathan a lot for emotional stability, not just with myself but with other people. And regarding other people, quite often for those people who are going through grief after they have lost a husband or a wife or a spouse. So that grief that they go through, I find that Leviathan, it's almost like washing the person through Leviathan's dark waters. And through that washing process, where previously the emotions are going up and down and they're haywire, it kind of levels all that out, calms everything down. And through that calming process, the person's able to just step back a little bit and understand the process of life and death and, you know, the things that happened, but still grieve at the same time. So it gives more of an understanding, gives a calmness, which allows the healing process to actually take place. And in order for that healing process to take place, the grief still needs to take place. So it doesn't remove the grief. The grief's got to be there. The person's got to go through that grieving process in order to heal. But it makes it, it brings calmness and it brings understanding, which allows that process to happen easier and more effectively. Anyway, that's what I found. So that's very much Leviathan for me. However, I will mention when I went to go meet Leviathan, he did not appear as a gentle, kind old man sitting on a throne. That's just kind of like the imagery I get when I think of Leviathan. But he appeared, and it wasn't really a sea monster either. He did appear as a fishman. A bit taller than I was, but a physical humanoid form with fins, very much like you might imagine something like 40 Leagues Under the Sea. I think that's what it was called. Those old movies where you see the fishmen. Actually, very much the imagery was very much like that. So that's what I experienced when I went to go meet Leviathan, or as he appeared to me anyway. These things, the spirits are going to appear differently to everybody. There are going to be some similarities in here and there, and that's where the general symbolism or the imagery actually starts to develop. Somebody says, I saw this spirit and he looked like X, Y, and Z. Then the next person has an expectation, and therefore they're going to see something similar but not the same, because they can't experience the same thing unless you can get into the person's head and actually see the memory. So they will have an expectation based on the explanation they were given, but it's going to be slightly different, and then they're going to tell somebody else, and that person's going to experience that spirit based on that explanation, but it's going to be slightly different, etc., etc., etc. And the symbolism, the imagery, and everything that we generally find comes out of this. But Leviathan is very much associated with water, found in the West. I do believe this was first publicly mentioned I do believe this originally came out of Abramelin the Mage, the sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage. So yeah, I always find Leviathan in the West, always associated with the waters, and there's a lot of association with the waters you can find there. The dark waters of Leviathan, the healing waters of Leviathan, the wrapping around of the earth, and this is what I want to get back to now. So the reason I want to bring Varuna into this, some time back I thought I was being called by Vishnu. It turned out that it wasn't actually Vishnu, it was Varuna. And I realized this when I was I had a dream, and I had to sign a book, and it was the book of Varuna, and I had to sign it in order to be allowed into his realm, into his world. So I signed the book because I said Varuna's my god, and I was allowed in and everything else. So there was that bit of a change or a misinterpretation that I had in the past. Although, in some cases it can be argued that Varuna and Vishnu are very much the same. I actually personally, I don't find them to be the same at all. But anyway, so I signed my name in the book of Varuna, and through the shared symbolism, I find Varuna to be probably one of the Ouroboros spirits, and very similar to Leviathan. Now, Varuna is one of the deities. These are considered to be responsible for the workings of the world. So the name Varuna actually means he who covers, and what this is referring to is the covering of the world itself. So we can consider it to be the atmosphere surrounding the earth. Okay. The story does go that Varuna. Sorry, I just want to go back to the deities. So the deities are found in various Hindu texts. In the Rig Veda, it's mentioned that there are 7, sometimes 8 deities. In other texts, it's 8 or 12. But in some texts, Varuna is not even mentioned. It's a different list of names and deities, or deities. But Varuna is mentioned in most of them. So the deities, as I said, are responsible for the proper functioning of the world, of the universe. And the deities came from Aditi, who is the mother of gods. So you have these in the different texts. You have various different lists of names, but Varuna appears in most of them. So Varuna means he who covers, and it is referring to the atmosphere that is surrounding the earth. Now, if we consider the world serpent is wrapped around the world, and if in the case of Jormungandr, if he releases his tail, Ragnarok begins. In the case of the Hebraic Leviathan and those myths and mythologies, it is considered to be, especially in the Gnostic texts, but it's considered to be a serpent that wraps around the earth and separates the material from the divine. So if we consider the atmosphere of the world, it separates the earth from space. Okay? And if that atmosphere had to collapse, it would be the end of days, because our earth would not be able to survive anymore. So if we were to consider the world serpent, the Ouroboros, Leviathan, Varuna, to be the atmosphere which is protecting the world from solar flares, or the Earth from solar flares and things like that, then it would be the end of days if that world serpent were to be defeated, or were to release its own tail. You know, if you consider, you know, something, a serpent biting its own tail, if it were to release, it would create a gap, and that space, that gap, can be considered to be the atmosphere collapsing, and it would be a disaster. Let's put it that way. So I think when we look at this, it is that idea of the atmosphere which is the world serpent. Now, also in relation to Varuna versus Leviathan, Varuna is the god of the oceans, and Leviathan is considered to be the god of the oceans, waters, rivers, lakes, exactly the same as Varuna. There is a tale from the Rig Veda about Varuna had this supreme authority. He was considered to be the god of that covers the earth, so the god of the atmosphere, and also god of the waters. But there was a bit of a falling out between him and Indra, and Varuna lost that supreme authority, and Indra then became the lord of the atmosphere, and Varuna continued to be lord of the oceans, or lord of the waters, because it's not just the oceans and the seas, it's also the lakes, the rivers, the streams, all bodies of water. And this again is in reference to Leviathan. So we have two main aspects here of both Varuna and Leviathan, is the world serpent. So we have this aspect of Leviathan and Varuna being, or covering, creating a layer, a protective layer around the earth, and this protects us from space, from solar flares, etc., in order so that we may live. So there's that aspect, that world serpent, the covering, the surrounding aspect. Then we have the aspect of water, bodies of water, all bodies of water, which is found both with Leviathan and especially with Varuna. So I've been tossing up and going back and forth as to whether they are the same spirit. I kind of didn't want them to be the same spirit, but everything keeps pulling me to that idea that they are. And maybe they are separate spirits. This is obviously going to be determined personally, whether you are a soft polytheist or a hard polytheist. We can look at it in the aspect of they are completely separate beings, but they have the same root. So if we were to consider an entity, and over time and through various migrations and trade routes and things like that, that spirit gets pulled in one direction and in another direction, and then it becomes two different spirits, and stories that start to develop around these two spirits, but they still have that same root. Or we can view them as completely and utterly separate, or we can view them as being the same spirit, found in different regions, therefore have different names, therefore have their own stories, but still being the same spirit. So this becomes a personal journey. I can't tell you which is right and which is wrong, because neither are right and neither are wrong. It's just a case of how you view things. Alright, so yeah, that's really what I wanted to talk about in regards to Leviathan and Varuna, my own personal experiences, how I view things, and such. So going to leave it there this week, and I'll see you next week. Have a good one. Cheers for now. Bye bye.